Lameness locator can also be used to evaluate flexion tests, but a baseline before flexion trial that collects and analyzes the approximate same number of strides as evaluated after a flexion test should be collected first for comparison. Baseline before flexion is a selectable trial options in the lameness locator software. Then you look at the results in the dual report. Here's an example of a horse that started out with a left hind limb lameness, and then here's the report after the flexion test. Notice that the rays, the upwardly directed red rays that indicate a push-off lameness, simply got longer. This was a positive flexion test. You could then look at the lameness values to see how much they rose to more quantitate the results of the flexion test. The dual report is also a good way to judge the effectiveness of a block, with the before block trial on the left and the after block trial on the right of the dual report. When the lameness variable changes by the equivalent of its 95% confidence interval for repeatability, this is considered a significant change, or a positive block. For the A1-A2 ratio of the head, this value is about 30% of the original value, and for the pelvis, about 20% of the starting value. For max diff head and min diff head, it is plus or minus 6 millimeters, regardless of the starting value, and for the max diff pelvis and min diff pelvis, it is plus or minus 3 millimeters, regardless of the value of the starting value. This, however, is a very conservative estimate for a significant change. At levels of lameness severity near threshold, or very mild lameness, it is best to relax these stringent guidelines when looking for significant change. With mild levels of lameness, a change in the measure from above to below threshold, for instance, especially when the standard deviations are small, should be considered significant. Here is a particular problem. Horses with pre-existing pelvic asymmetry, with one tubersacral lower than the other, may show asymmetric pelvic movement when trotting that may not be consistent with lameness. The asymmetric pelvic movement that you may see will be less downward movement on the high side and less upward movement on the low side. So, here's an example. What are the possibilities of a hind limb evaluation that looks like this? With a left hind limb push-off asymmetry, a negative max diff pelvis, and a right hind limb impact asymmetry, a positive min diff pelvis. In other words, the rays are rotating in a clockwise direction. Well, there are actually 4 possible scenarios for this type of bilateral, 2 different type hind limb lameness. And I'm listing them in order of the most to least likelihood. Number 1, the horse is lunging to the right. Of course, you would know this because you would have collected the data. Second explanation of this pattern is the horse has a compensatory movement of the pelvis, in other words, a compensatory false lameness, due to a primary right forelimb lameness. This is actually the second part of the law of sides. A third possibility is that the horse has asymmetric pelvis. It is down on the left and high on the right side. And if I see this pattern and the horse is not lunging and it doesn't have a forelimb lameness, I make sure I check the horse for this. And the fourth possibility, which is the least likely scenario because it is really the most complicated, is that the horse actually does have 2 hind limbs lame. One a push-off lameness and one an impact lameness. This is the end of lameness locator report analysis. Thank you for listening.